She asked me to walk her home, and then she whispered, "You don't have to leave when we get there." The office had emptied hours ago, leaving only the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint click of my keyboard. The quiet was almost comforting, like a pause in the constant motion of life. I was about to shut down my laptop when a soft voice startled me from the doorway. "Would you mind walking me home?" I froze. It was her, my boss's wife, standing there in a coat that hinted at elegance without effort. Her eyes met mine with that subtle smile that always seemed to carry a secret. My first instinct was to refuse. Boundaries, propriety, all the rational warnings my mind could muster. But then she tilted her head slightly, her hair brushing the collar of her coat, and the faint scent of her perfume, something warm, soft, with a hint of jasmine, drifted toward me. My hesitation wavered. "It's not far," she added, and there was an almost imperceptible pause, as if she trusted me to make the choice without pressure. Her hand gestured toward the exit, brushing against the frame of the door. The brief contact sent a small, unfamiliar warmth through me, a ripple I couldn't quite explain. I nodded before I could overthink it, and together we stepped into the quiet night. The streetlights cast a soft glow over the pavement, creating long shadows that danced as we walked side by side. I found myself acutely aware of her presence, the gentle sway of her coat, the way her hands rested lightly on her bag strap, the occasional lift of her chin when she noticed something in the distance. Conversation began almost hesitantly, like two strangers testing the waters, but it flowed quickly into a natural rhythm. She spoke of small, ordinary things, books she'd been reading, a new cafe she liked, but there was a depth beneath her words, a quiet intelligence that drew me in. I realized I was listening not just to what she said, but to how she said it, the subtle shifts in her tone, the soft inflection that made her laughter feel intimate even in the open night. Our arms brushed occasionally, each contact fleeting but electric. It was innocent, almost accidental, yet I felt the pulse of something more in those moments, the kind of small, silent acknowledgement that makes the heart beat a little faster. Every step beside her was a study in contrast, her calm, confident presence against my nervous awareness, her warmth against the chill of the evening air. I found myself wanting to prolong the walk, to linger in the easy cadence of her company. Yet with every step, a quiet voice in my mind reminded me of boundaries, of the impossibility of what this could be. And still, the way she smiled when she caught me glancing at her, the soft brush of her hand against mine when she adjusted her bag, made the rational mind falter. By the time we reached the edge of her neighborhood, I was caught between relief and reluctance, relief that we had arrived safely, and reluctance that the walk, and this unexpected connection, had to end. I hadn't expected anything from this evening, yet here I was, acutely aware of her presence beside me, wishing I could somehow stretch the moments just a little longer. And then she turned toward her door, glanced back at me, and said in that quiet, almost teasing voice, "You don't have to leave when we get there." I froze again, the words hanging in the night air, carrying more weight than I could have imagined. Something told me that this walk, simple and innocent at first glance, was only the beginning. The streets were quiet, almost hushed, as if the city itself had taken a breath. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain that had passed earlier, mixing with the subtle warmth of the streetlights. We walked side by side, our footsteps falling into an easy rhythm. There was no need for conversation at first, just the sound of our shoes on the pavement and the occasional rustle of leaves. Yet the silence was not empty, it was charged, heavy with unspoken awareness. She spoke first, softly, as if testing the waters. "I've always liked this route," she said. Her voice had that calm, confident quality, but there was a subtle softness underneath, like she was letting someone see a part of her usually hidden. I nodded, listening, careful not to let my curiosity show too obviously. But I couldn't help stealing glances at her, noticing the way the light caught the curve of her cheek, the gentle sway of her hair as it moved with her steps. We began to talk. At first it was small things, books she had recently read, a new cafe in the neighborhood, but quickly the conversation deepened without either of us forcing it. She had a way of speaking that invited honesty, a quiet warmth that made it easy to share thoughts I normally kept to myself. I found myself talking about my own life, carefully measured truths slipping out without fear of judgment. Our arms brushed occasionally, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver through me. Each contact was brief, almost accidental, yet it left a lingering heat that neither of us acknowledged aloud. There was a tension in those moments, subtle, electric, but safe. I realized I was paying attention to every small movement, the slight tilt of her head when she laughed, the delicate arch of her eyebrow when she made a point, the soft cadence of her footsteps alongside mine. I noticed the rhythm of her breathing, steady and calm, and I became aware of the way my own heartbeat seemed to sync with it. She looked at me sometimes with that quiet, knowing glance, as if she sensed the thoughts I tried to conceal. And I realized I didn't want to hide them, not from her. The attraction was undeniable, but it wasn't crude or urgent, it was a slow, warming curiosity that made every moment feel suspended in possibility. At one point, she paused to adjust her coat and our hands brushed again, slightly longer this time. I felt the subtle warmth of her fingers against mine, a fleeting intimacy that made the night feel suddenly smaller, more private. The world beyond our little bubble, the quiet street, the distant hum of traffic, faded. I was only aware of her, of the soft scent of her perfume, of the warmth radiating from her, of the almost imperceptible tension that held us in unspoken conversation. By the time we reached a small park along the route, she stopped beneath a lamp post. "I almost wish this walk could last a little longer," she said, a small smile touching her lips. I felt the pull in my chest, the desire to stay, the hesitation born of propriety, and the undeniable thrill of being near her. And in that quiet moment, side by side under the golden glow of the lamp, I understood something profoundly simple: this walk, this ordinary act, was becoming something extraordinary, a gentle unraveling of barriers I hadn't known existed. The connection between us was subtle but real, a slow burn that promised far more than either of us could yet name. We reached the quiet street where her home stood, a modest yet elegant townhouse tucked behind a row of maple trees. The night was calm, and the soft glow from the street lamps painted everything in golden warmth. I felt a strange mixture of relief and reluctance, relief that the walk had been peaceful, and reluctance that this shared, suspended moment was drawing to a close. She paused in front of her door, glancing at me as if weighing something unspoken. Her hand lingered near the handle, fingertips brushing lightly over the cool metal. I noticed the subtle way her shoulders relaxed when she met my gaze, the faint exhale she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For a heartbeat, time seemed to pause, the world reduced to just the space between us. "You don't have to leave when we get there," she said softly, almost casually, but the words carried an unexpected weight. My heart skipped a beat, not from shock, but from the quiet charge in the air. She didn't press me, didn't push for an answer. She simply offered the possibility, like handing me a key without explaining what it opened. I found myself momentarily speechless. My mind raced with questions, boundaries, and ethics, but beneath it all was a simpler truth: I wanted to stay. I wanted to see what she meant, to linger in this rare intimacy that had grown over the course of our walk. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, warmer now, mingling with the slight chill of the night air. It made my senses acutely aware of every detail: the curve of her cheek in the lamplight, the soft way her hair framed her face, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. Her eyes held mine steadily, patient and knowing. There was no judgment there, only a quiet invitation. It was a glance that demanded honesty, both in thought and feeling. I noticed the tiny shift of her weight as she leaned slightly toward me, the warmth radiating subtly from her body. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, yet it carried a promise that lingered in the space between us. For a moment, I considered stepping back, asserting the boundaries I knew existed. But the pull of this connection, this rare, unspoken understanding, was too strong. I realized that this wasn't just attraction, it was a delicate, growing intimacy that neither of us could entirely define, yet both recognized. The air seemed to thicken with possibility. I became aware of the faint rustle of her coat as she moved slightly, of the way the streetlight softened the shadows around her. Her presence was grounding yet intoxicating, a contradiction I hadn't anticipated. My hands itched to gesture, to reach out, yet I restrained myself, savoring the tension, the unspoken dance of closeness and restraint. Finally, I gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that I understood her meaning and accepted the invitation without words. She smiled, a quiet, knowing curve of her lips that made the corner of my chest tighten. The door swung open, and the warm light of her home spilled into the night, inviting yet intimate, promising a space where the ordinary rules of the world could soften just enough to allow this quiet connection to breathe. And as we stepped inside, I realized that the walk, which had seemed like a simple gesture, had become a threshold, not just to her home, but to something far more complex, an uncharted closeness, delicate and intoxicating, waiting for both of us to explore it carefully, one gentle step at a time. The door clicked softly behind us, and the warmth of her home enveloped me immediately, a gentle contrast to the crisp night air outside. The faint scent of vanilla candles mingled with the lingering trace of her perfume, creating a comforting cocoon that seemed to hush the rest of the world. She gestured toward the living room, and I followed, my senses heightened to every subtle motion, every nuanced expression. She moved with effortless grace, pouring tea into delicate cups, her hands steady yet somehow intimate in the way they carried small gestures. I watched her, noticing how the light fell across her hair, giving it a soft, golden halo. The quiet clink of the teacups against the saucers punctuated the stillness, a gentle rhythm that made my heart rate a little faster without warning. We settled onto the couch together, sitting close enough that our knees nearly touched. The space between us was comfortable, yet charged with an unspoken tension. I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her, subtle but grounding, as if proximity alone could convey what words could not. Conversation began casually, but it quickly deepened as she shared glimpses of her life, small regrets, quiet joys, and moments she rarely spoke of aloud. Her voice was steady but soft, a tone that drew me in effortlessly. I found myself responding with honesty I rarely offered to anyone, revealing thoughts and feelings that usually stayed tucked away. Each admission felt safer in her presence, as though the room itself understood the delicacy of the moment. And all the while, I was aware of the occasional brush of her hand against mine, brief, seemingly accidental touches that left a subtle warmth lingering on my skin. She laughed softly at one of my observations, the sound like a quiet melody that stayed with me long after it faded. When she did, her shoulder brushed mine, and I felt a shiver of awareness pass through me, a gentle reminder that this connection, though restrained, was real and palpable. I caught myself stealing glances, noticing the way her eyes softened when she looked at me, the small lift of her lips when she was amused. The tea grew cold between us, unnoticed, as the evening seemed to stretch and fold around this new intimacy. I realized that proximity itself had become a language, the way our bodies angled toward each other, the soft brush of fingers, the lingering pauses in conversation that spoke more than words ever could. Every gesture was subtle, yet each carried weight, building a tapestry of tension, trust, and quiet longing. At one point, she adjusted her position on the couch, her hand brushing against mine once again, this time a fraction longer. I could feel the pulse beneath her skin, steady and real, and it mirrored my own. It was grounding, intoxicating, and utterly human. For a moment, I considered the boundaries, the complications that could arise, but the warmth of her presence and the ease of our connection made restraint feel natural rather than forced. By the time the conversation drifted to quieter, reflective topics, I sensed a profound shift. The closeness between us was no longer tentative. It was an understanding built on shared vulnerability, a comfort that was intimate without crossing the line, and a tension that simmered just beneath the surface. In that room, on that couch, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only her, and there was only this, an unspoken connection that promised more than either of us dared to name aloud. The room had grown quieter, as if the outside world had quietly slipped away. The soft glow from a table lamp painted her living space in shades of honey and amber, warming everything it touched. She sat across from me on the couch, her tea forgotten on the table, fingers loosely wrapped around the cup as if it were a shield and yet a comfort. I noticed the slight tremor in her hands, almost imperceptible, but it drew my attention in a way nothing else could. Her eyes met mine, open and honest, carrying a vulnerability she rarely showed to anyone. "Sometimes," she began, her voice soft and steady but tinged with something unspoken, "I feel invisible, even in my own life." She paused, letting the words hang between us. There was no accusation, only quiet confession, and it made the air feel heavier, more intimate. I leaned slightly forward, careful not to intrude, but my body language mirrored my intent. I was here, fully present. "I understand," I said quietly. "More than you might think." The words were simple, but my tone carried sincerity, and she seemed to absorb them like a lifeline. I could feel the subtle shift in her posture, how her shoulders softened, how her gaze lingered just a moment longer. She spoke more, each sentence revealing layers of herself, her frustrations, her moments of loneliness, and the quiet ache of desire for connection that she rarely admitted, even to herself. Her voice carried the weight of honesty, the kind that makes someone feel both exposed and safe at once. I listened with full attention, noticing every nuance, the way her eyelashes caught the light, the slight quiver in her lips when she paused, the tiny gestures of her hands that punctuated her words. And then, in a moment so fleeting I almost missed it, her hand brushed against my arm. Not a deliberate touch, but a soft, grounding one. The warmth of her skin was immediate, an electric pulse that ran straight through me. I didn't pull away, I let it linger, letting the gesture speak what words could not. It was a declaration without declaration, a quiet acknowledgement that she trusted me, and that I mattered in this private space. I felt a swelling in my chest, not desire in the crude sense, but something deeper, an emotional resonance that tethered me to her. I wanted to comfort her, to reassure her without intruding, to simply be present in this rare intimacy. I noticed how her breathing slowed as she settled more comfortably near me, the tension in her body melting subtly under the weight of shared trust. Time seemed to stretch. The small room became a sanctuary where confessions could be spoken and absorbed without judgment. Each pause, each fleeting brush of our hands, each lingering glance built layers of understanding and subtle desire. The attraction between us was undeniable, yet it wasn't overt. It was the kind of tension that lives in quiet spaces, in words half-spoken, in moments of shared vulnerability. By the end of the conversation, I realized that the connection had deepened beyond curiosity or initial fascination. We were tethered now by something fragile and rare, a silent understanding, emotional intimacy, and the slow, undeniable pull of something more, something that promised to unfold carefully, tenderly, with respect and depth. In that quiet, amber-lit room, the night had transformed into a private world of shared heartbeats and unspoken truths, leaving both of us suspended in the delicate beauty of proximity and trust. The evening had settled into a comfortable rhythm, the room bathed in the warm, golden glow of the lamp. Time seemed suspended, stretching out so that every subtle sound, the soft rustle of fabric, the faint clink of a spoon against a teacup, felt amplified. The quiet intimacy between us was tangible, like a current moving beneath the surface, felt but not named. She shifted slightly on the couch, and the movement brought her just a little closer. Our knees brushed, a contact so slight it could have been accidental, yet it sent a subtle warmth rippling through me. I felt the faint pulse of her presence, steady and grounding, and realized how acutely aware I was of every detail, the softness of her sweater against my arm, the gentle curve of her wrist as she rested it near mine, the way her hair caught the lamplight, framing her face in strands of gold and shadow. Her laughter, quiet and melodic, broke the stillness. It wasn't directed at anything overtly funny, just a reflection of the ease between us. As she laughed, her hand brushed against mine again, this time slightly longer, and the warmth that radiated from that simple touch seemed to linger in the space between us. It wasn't bold or forward, it was deliberate in its subtlety, a gentle acknowledgement of our shared presence. I found myself leaning in, not consciously, but drawn toward her. There was a gravity in her quiet attention, in the way she listened to every word, in the way her eyes softened when they met mine. I wanted to stay here, in this delicate, suspended moment, where the world beyond the walls of her home didn't exist. It was a space that belonged only to us, defined by quiet gestures, soft glances, and touches that lingered just long enough to mean something without needing words. She shifted again, closer still, our shoulders almost touching now. There was no need to speak, the room was filled with an understanding that neither of us had to articulate. Every subtle movement carried weight, the tilt of her head, the slight brush of her fingers, the way her gaze held mine a fraction longer than necessary. It was a tension that simmered, restrained yet palpable, the kind that makes your heartbeat feel simultaneously slow and racing. I became aware of the faint warmth of her hand near mine, the delicate scent of her perfume mingling with the soft vanilla of the candle. It was intoxicating in the quietest way possible, a slow-building sensation that made the air between us electric without crossing any overt boundaries. I realized that desire didn't always need to be loud, sometimes it thrived in these suspended spaces, in quiet intimacy and shared vulnerability. Finally, she rested her hand gently on the arm of the couch near mine, close enough to brush if I shifted, but without overt action. I felt the pull, the unspoken invitation, and let the moment settle fully. It was exquisite, an acknowledgement of the connection, the tension, the tenderness, without any need to rush or resolve it. The night had become a delicate dance of proximity and restraint, each gesture a promise of trust, care, and subtle desire. As the lamp flickered slightly, casting shadows that danced across her face, I realized this moment, the soft closeness, the shared laughter, the lingering touches, was the pinnacle of everything building between us. Tenderness had replaced hesitation, and the unspoken understanding was complete, an intimate, slow-burn connection that neither of us would forget, a moment suspended in the quiet beauty of what could be. The night had grown quieter, the street outside now washed in the silver glow of the moon. Inside, her home retained its golden warmth, the soft lamplight highlighting the gentle contours of the room, casting long, comforting shadows. The tension that had hummed subtly between us earlier had transformed into a calm, steady warmth, an intimacy that no longer needed words to define it. She stood near the door, her coat draped over her arm, the soft curve of her smile enough to make my chest tighten. I hesitated for a moment, aware that the night had stretched far beyond an ordinary walk, yet grateful for every second. There was no awkwardness, no sense of impropriety hanging heavy in the air, just a quiet understanding, a mutual acknowledgement of what had quietly unfolded between us. "You don't have to go just yet," she said softly, her voice carrying the same gentle ease as before. It wasn't a demand, nor a suggestion meant to manipulate, it was an invitation to linger, to share one more moment before parting. I nodded, feeling the pull in my chest, the desire to stay and yet the understanding that every connection has its natural rhythm. We moved to the small balcony, just enough space to breathe in the night air. The cool breeze contrasted with the warmth of her presence, making me acutely aware of proximity in a way that was both grounding and thrilling. Our shoulders brushed lightly, the contact brief yet meaningful, and I felt the subtle electricity of touch, an echo of all the moments we had shared during the evening. We talked quietly, words floating easily, as if the night itself had slowed to accommodate us. I noticed how her hands moved when she spoke, how her eyes softened in the moonlight, and the way her laughter lingered, a gentle melody that stayed with me long after it faded. It was a conversation that needed no conclusion, each exchange more about being present than conveying anything specific. When it was finally time to leave, there was no rush, no awkward hesitation. She extended her hand in a casual gesture of farewell, but our fingers brushed just long enough to make the heart skip a beat. The warmth of that touch lingered as I stepped back, leaving her doorway with the quiet awareness that the evening had changed something in both of us. As I walked down the familiar street, the night air crisp against my skin, I replayed the subtle moments, the fleeting touches, the shared laughter, the long glances that carried more meaning than words could ever capture. I realized that intimacy didn't always demand grand gestures, sometimes it existed quietly, in proximity, in understanding, in the willingness to simply be present for another person. By the time I reached the corner where our paths diverged, the night felt alive with possibility, yet at peace. There was no urgency, no pressure, only the lingering warmth of connection that had been carefully cultivated. I knew this was not the end, but rather a beginning, a promise of future conversations, subtle touches, and quiet moments where words were secondary to presence. And in that silence, walking alone under the moonlight, I felt the unmistakable certainty of something rare and profound, a slow-burning intimacy built on trust, respect, and subtle desire, complete and satisfying in its own delicate way. The night had given us more than a walk or a conversation, it had given us each other, quietly, tenderly, and irrevocably changed. If you enjoyed this story and the quiet tension between them, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another slow burn romance. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you were in his shoes?